Welcome to Security Weekly. We are broadcasting live from BlackHat 2019. We're in our suite at Mandalay Bay, and for this interview, I am joined by Brett Wahlin, the Chief Information Security Officer at Respond Software. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
So we're going to talk about Lights Out SOC, and we're going to talk about automation, which is a kind of a hot topic. Been a lot of activity in the SOAR space as of late. Some big acquisitions by some very big security vendors. But what you guys are doing with Lights Out is a little different than SOAR. So let's start a little bit with just kind of the premise for kind of the problem around the SOC, and then we'll talk about how Respond does it from an automation perspective.
Yeah. So when we look at kind of the SOC and the problem around automation and what I've been trying to do for years is how do I staff a SOC and how do I keep that level one kind of engaged in the program, and it's always where you have the most turnover. As we started looking at the building a SOC and seeing some of the things you can do with machine learning, artificial intelligence. This is back in the days when I was CISO at HP. We started learning that, hey, we can actually get some of this automated. And when we talk about machine learning and automation, what I'm really referring to is the automation of a decision. And so when you look at what a level one analyst does, they're looking at all these events coming off your SIM, and they have to sit there and clear that channel. They have to say, is this good? Is this bad? It's a highly repetitive, what I refer to as a transactional security task, and it's quite frankly boring, which is why we have to continue to hire and train these SOC analysts, because they'll do the job for a little bit and then they'll leave. What I was able to do in the quest for Lights Out SOC is deploy Respond software. I was actually their first customer, and that really had a decision model based in math as a probabilistic decision model. And it would look at events and it would calculate many different factors. And so the number of facts that they were looking at for just the very first model, which happened to be intrusion prevention. So that very first model would look at 60 different things every time it would make a decision. I mean, could you imagine an analyst that could actually, every single time that person looked at 60 different things, just to make that one decision? And then those analysts, they can maybe do 75 to 150 events every single hour. The software can do about 80,000 per hour. So you're looking at 60 facts, 80,000 an hour. And what you end up getting is when you buy something like a Respond analyst, you've got the equivalent of like 42 different analysts that you've just now deployed in your environment, and they don't take a break. They don't get sick. They don't get bored.
They don't take vacation.
Yeah, they don't just start clicking things to clear the channel. It's highly effective. And because they're looking at all the facts, we're also now reducing the number of false positives because there's just so many different checks that are being done. So when you actually do have an escalation, the amount of time that the analysts that are like at your level 2 or your level 3, the amount of time that they spend hunting down events is now really effective because it's kind of cleared out for them. You see some of the pieces and like, oh, we know that's a false positive because we check so many different areas. When something escalates, now the level 2 is really onto something. And so that time is now spent much more effectively. So that was kind of the start of Lights Out SOC. Can I get to the point where that whole level 1 just doesn't exist? It's really done in software. So it's not there yet. We're still, there's models that need to be developed, but it's really close. So.
Which is different than SOAR, right? Because really, the security orchestration automation response platforms are really about automating workflow and the steps required to potentially, investigate and or remediate an attack, for example. What you're talking about is, I'm just determining whether that is an actual event that I should even do anything with. It's that first decision of, I see something, but I don't know if it's something I should research or not. And so it actually sits in front of the SOAR platform really in this particular case, right?
Yes, correct. So if you look at the architecture for SOAR, you typically have a SIM of some nature that's collecting the events and going through the correlation and what do I need to filter out and what do I need to send to an analyst. Then you have an analyst making a decision whether or not this needs to be fixed, remediated, et cetera. And then that then goes to your SOAR platform. So on the other end, I can write a playbook, run books, and it will go do its thing. That analyst still has to be there. And so we've fit in where that analyst is. So you can still use SIM, you can still use your tools, you can still use SOAR. Now you're just processing through an awful lot. And the one thing I found when I started deploying this was that my reliance on SIM really started to drop. You build so much into it because you have that constraint around 150 events an hour.
Yeah.
Take away that constraint, and what do you end up having? So you can look upstream and say, well, I don't have to filter out as much. I can just take the data.
Oh.
And so my reliance on SIM, my investment in bandwidth in the SIM platforms, all can begin to drop because I don't have that constraint around 150 events an hour.
Right, because you don't necessarily need the SIM to do the correlation step for you, right?
Right.
If you're taking that data raw and you can reassemble it and analyze it through your models, then in some respects you can kind of sidestep the SIM potentially, depending on whether the customer wants to do that or not. I'm curious, is your normal deployment with a SIM and really bringing correlated events from the SIM to you, or is it more of a replacement for the SIM in bringing the raw data feeds to you? How do you see those different deployment models today?
It really depends where the customer is. So we have a lot of customers who have an investment in SIM.
Yeah, and a pretty big one.
Yeah, and there's no reason to stop that investment. We can loosen it, so you don't have to continue to pay for the bandwidth, and you don't have the engineering teams to write the use cases. We can loosen that up a little bit, but we can fit right in there. That's one model of customer deployment where that's really effective. We really just, where that human analyst is where we sit.
Yep.
The other forms of customers are those that are kind of in an MSSP, or maybe they have 4 guys who sometimes look at a SIM and then do a bunch of other stuff in the company because it's a smaller team.
Yeah.
What we're enabling them is to now have 24/7 coverage where they never had it before, or they might have had an MSSP that's really expensive, maybe not as effective as they want it to be. They can run this in conjunction with an MSSP or even as a substitute for one. So it really architecturally, it'll meet the CISO where they are in their program. Are they transforming a program? Are they building a program? Are they maintaining? What do they want to do? As long as there's that that element where a human analyst has to make a decision, that's where we slot in, and we just make that super efficient and very cost effective.
Got it. So when I think about deployment for a second of the solution, is it a bunch of integration points for the different data feeds to come in to respond, and then once a decision is made, it's a set of integrations to potentially your SOAR platform to actually then start your playbooks? Is that kind of what a typical implementation looks like?
Yeah, you would implement it. We need the raw data feed coming in, so that can come from the tool itself. So your IPS, your endpoint protection.
Yeah, your log.
Yeah, so we can take those direct feeds and we'll parse that out and run it through our math model. Or we can take it from the SIM. So it goes into SIM, it goes through its pieces, and it comes back out, and then we'll take that into our math model and make the decision. Once the decision's been made and an escalation point has hit, then we can feed it downstream. So however your workflow is set up, do you send that to your SOAR platform? Do you send it to
a level 2 analyst?
A level 2 analyst, a ticketing system, anything like that will then send that off. So it's really just that person getting really, really fast. So imagine somebody who can just, you hired the best analyst in the world, and they're just superhuman capacity. They come in and they're doing 80,000 events an hour. All the rest of the workflow still there. We don't require people to dump their investments or change their processes or work around it. It's just where that person is. We just make them much more effective.
Got it. Now, some would say, well, putting a solution in place like this would eliminate security jobs. But I think if I think about the skill set requirements here, right, I'm trying to augment where we know we have a pretty big skills gap in the industry, and that is kind of those level 1 analysts. Hard to find, hard to maintain after they're trained, et cetera. And so I think the positioning is I can make your SOC 1 analysts kind of more efficient from a software perspective, but I still need level 2, I still need level 3, I still need some of these other jobs. Maybe they're easier to recruit for, or maybe easier to maintain when I have them, because it's always that balance of automation versus people, right?
Right, exactly. And so it's not replacing people, because there's never enough people.
Right.
So what we're doing is we're really taking that job and you kind of divide security work into transactional security versus cognitive security. And so it's the work that is just highly repetitive and really mundane versus the thing that really takes a lot of thought around troubleshooting and curiosity and trying to figure out what just happened here and how do I fix it. So if you look at that, level 1 is 100% transactional. It just takes an event in, I look at a few feeds, and I make a decision. So that's just exactly perfect for a machine to do. So when the software is making those decisions, you can move the level 1 to level 2. You can change your kind of your mix of what you're doing.
Right.
But what you really ended up doing is for a smaller type of a tools investment, you're really getting an OpEx hit because you're getting the equivalent of going out and hiring 40 people.
Yeah.
And so from an OpEx perspective, I mean, the CISO's budget loves this because it's a tools-based approach to headcount.
Right.
And so you can, it fits in the budget nicely. Now you've got a tool that doesn't really care that it's a mundane task. And so the roles that the people on the team are actually doing are now much more fulfilling because it's actual real security work. You can get in and do something as opposed to just clicking a box and going event, not an event.
Right.
So it all around, it makes the budget much more friendly. It makes the work a lot more interesting. So the retention, it's much easier to hire into somebody who's going to do some real analytical work where I'm hunting down, I'm finding something, I'm working on an engineering
being
problem.
a little more proactive in your security program instead of being so reactive to all the data feeds.
Yep. And then when that job is more fulfilling for a person, they're going to stay longer.
Yeah.
So it's not the complete solution to the security staffing issues, but it really helps in this space.
Yeah, and I think what people need to realize is heads are expensive. It's not just the salary, it's the benefits, it's all this stuff. And when you manage a budget, you realize how much cost in your budget gets eaten up by people. And so if you can augment with that with software, that's a great way to kind of really keep your budget spend under control, which is great, and really fills a gap in where we've seen a lot of shortfall when it comes to the skill sets required for cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So I think that's great.
Yeah, exactly.
Outside of value around, look, you get an efficiency gain almost instantly, right? Because you're adding now 40 heads. You get a budget reduction potentially because you don't need the heads because you're using software to do it. Where's some of the other value of deploying response software for the customer?
So I think as we go down, the areas you mentioned, some of the other value is just in our ability to understand and find these events with the reduction of false positives. So as I mentioned, you're spending an awful lot of valuable resource time hunting down things that really don't need to be hunted down. So if you reduce that, you've now got a team who's spending their time a lot more effectively, and you're able to really get those deployment of your resources to where they need to be. The other thing that I was finding as I was deploying this, I think it was my second time around trying to get to the lights out SOC concept, the efficiencies really come in your up and downstream tooling costs. So as I mentioned, that kind of the constraint that we architect around with that human analyst, the 150 events an hour, removing that now allows me to make some tool changes, and it's more of a journey. So the tool changes really happen over time. But it frees up a lot of your CapEx budget because you don't have to invest in tools to really augment or handle what the human's limitations are.
Right.
So now I can deploy that into other tools that I would actually effectively control some of the security issues.
Right.
So there's a lot of gains that you'll get that are really outside the SOC because it's mainly budget redistribution once you've actually got the ability to not invest so much into your level 1, or if you're running an MSSP, not to have quite the bill when it comes due every month.
For all those resources.
Yeah.
What about shrinking time to detection, right? That's the other big one that everybody's trying to chase, right? We've seen the numbers come down from over 200 days average time for detection. I think now we're down to 160 days or so. Do we continue to see that get tighter and tighter because we have better decision processing done up front and we can start to shrink those windows?
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because you would think right off the bat that mean time to detection would really drop.
Yeah.
And it does. But the issue you still deal with is you've got to have, when like the respond analyst will detect instantaneously. So when the event triggers, we'll see it, we'll make a decision, and we know.
But it's the
escalation.
The other piece, yeah.
So we escalate it.
So the decision, yes, but for somebody to actually do something about it, maybe not quite yet.
Yeah, not quite yet.
Okay.
So, but instantaneous decision, maybe it takes the level 2 another day to get to it or 2 days to get to it. So you're still dropping it down to maybe 2 days, 3 days when you've actually uncovered an event. The other thing that's interesting around that is most times, at least in my career, when I've got an incident, I usually get a cluster of incidents. So I'll get 3 or 4, and you're like, oh, we're under attack. What is happening? This is crazy. It's just, everything is broken loose. Once you get into the investigation piece of that, maybe 2 days down the road or something, you'll realize they're all connected.
Yeah.
And they're all the same incident, but you didn't know that up
Right.
front. With all the math that's going on and seeing all the different facts that are happening, the kind of a really interesting benefit is we see these little clusters as the same event really fast in the process. And so I know that, oh, I've got one event and it's actually triggering in 4 or 5 different locations. And then so I don't have to deploy mass quantities of resources.
And that makes the whole investigation and everything around that incident easier to tackle.
Right.
It's awesome. If people want to learn more about Respond software, where should they go?
Probably easiest is to the Respond software website. You can look us up, respond-software.com, and there's plenty of resources. We've done a lot of research on white papers, kind of how it works. You can request a demo, and we'd be happy to kind of work and see how this fits into anybody's program.
Awesome. Brett, thank you for joining us.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for watching, and we'll come back soon.